industry, but in a way for the whole chain of users, in which we do need to understand that we cannot expect, for instance, end users to be accountable for complex things. So it's up to the service provider to provide solutions for which people can take their own accountability, in a way just like healthcare. You can not make general practitioners fully accountable for somebody being healthy. That person needs to be something about it themselves too. But you shouldn't expect them to operate themselves.
So I'm sorry, I think I still have 15 seconds to ask you. Please don't use timer this time. So you're basically referring rather to the spirit of law than the letter of law, right?
I think it's the principle that we are not thinking that we are overruling local legislation.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn another question about the law to the dynamic coalition on blockchain. I saw that you raised so many interesting issues in your paper, referring to different problems and discussions around blockchain. But these discussions on blockchain and regulation in the last year made so many headlines. And here I'm going to cite a bit. You say that you are considering the issues on whether and how law can provide guideposts for blockchain governance. Could you elaborate a bit on the position of your dynamic coalition on blockchain law and governance?
Okay, great. Hi, thanks a lot. So firstly, let me say that kind of fundamentally, blockchains are software running on a bunch of computers on a distributed network, usually the internet. And so there's a bunch of different processes that are involved in blockchain governance. There's the processes that govern the nodes, and choose what software they run, and there's processes that govern the software repositories. And there are governance institutions and norms that form around the processes that govern nodes, who all want to be connected so that they can peer and have a useful network. They need to run compatible implementations. And there's governance processes around the software and changes that are made to the software. And so and then the question from a legal point of view is which of these processes are inside your jurisdiction? Another question is from the point of view of the usefulness of blockchain in institutions and in helping institutions achieve their goals is like, if those processes are inside your jurisdiction, then can you actually rely on the blockchain to create some kind of institution or that is outside of your jurisdiction, and therefore that people can trust you won't tamper with? Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. And I will move to another dynamic coalition who cited one of the documents or built their paper on the documents, for me, in rather an unexpected way. And John, I'm talking about your dynamic coalition on child online protection, because I think that for me it was quite striking that you built your paper upon the Declaration of Rome, adopted by the Catholic Church. And I want to ask you in this regard, are you using this document as a general idea that was adopted by the Holy See to support your approach, or are you going to exercise any of the 13 recommendations outlined by them? So what is the synergy between your dynamic coalition and this particular paper? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the dynamic coalition on child internet safety, which I represent here, was represented at the meeting in Rome, which was convened by the Pontifical Gregorian University, which is essentially the Vatican's university. But it was an offspring as well, so it worked in conjunction with the We Protect Global Alliance. The We Protect Global Alliance, for those of you who are not familiar with it, was initiated by the British government 3 years ago, and then about 18 months ago it merged with an EU-US initiative to become the Global Alliance. And quite a number, or several at any rate, of the Dynamic Coalition members were represented in Rome at the meeting that you've referred to, that issued the Declaration of Rome. And we saw a great deal of synergy between what we've been doing for many, many years and what the Catholic Church in the form of the Holy Father, the Pope, decided to support. And whatever you might think about the Catholic Church as an institution and its history, particularly in this space, I don't think anybody doubts the personal commitment of the new Pope, well, it's not so new now, Pope Francis. He's a very well-regarded and globally respected ethical leader. So we could see a great deal of overlap and synergy between what we were trying to do and what the Catholic Church now seems to be very committed to doing. And by the way, let me just point out, in Rome, it wasn't just Catholics who were present taking part in the conference. There were lots and lots of different people from different religions and from no religions. ECPAT itself is a completely secular organization. If it was otherwise, I don't think I could work for it. So it wasn't, this was not about promoting, if you like, a Catholic agenda, but it was recognizing the personal leadership of the Pope, the leadership of the Catholic Church and its continuing importance in the world, and bringing those people together around commonly agreed goals. And we hope this will give an impetus to governments and parliaments around the world to start looking at these issues afresh.
Thank you very much, because I was afraid to ask this question in a controversial way, but basically in your response you addressed everything. Thank you. And now I'm moving to another dynamic coalition who deals not really with protection of vulnerable targets, but with access for people with disabilities and impairments. And you refer in your paper to the concepts which I find fascinating, the concept of universal design. Devices that are designed to ensure accessibility for anyone, including people with disabilities. And you refer to a case study of Pakistan, to the work of the ITU, and so on. And I wanted to ask you how your dynamic coalition is going to advance this concept of universal design. Is there anything you're already doing in this regard? Because I really think this is a great job. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It is a great question, and it is something that we are planning to discuss in our upcoming meeting later today. And I personally think that more discussions, more connections with other dynamic coalitions is really important. We had a session yesterday where we had the participation of Martin Botterman from the Dynamic Coalition IoT, where we're talking about IoT accessibility, because it is a cross-cutting issue and because it does impact vulnerable people, not only people with disabilities directly, but also the cross benefits to other groups. Like you mentioned, these cases show really that, for instance, something like captioning, which we're using today, not only for accessibility, but also for language diversity and supporting many other use cases. So I think with all these developments that we have, all the speakers in the prior sessions now, the prior speakers, all these developments that we're seeing, be it IoT, be it blockchains, or even the aspect of decentralized web and net neutrality, impact people with disabilities very greatly. And I think we need to do more efforts here in having the dynamic coalition more integrated. It's a cross-sectional aspect, more integrated in other dynamic coalitions.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to move back a bit to a legal side and the issues of responsibilities and regulation. And Nicolo from DC on platform responsibility, I have a question for you. You're making a very good point and very interesting point about us giving so much power and so much information to the platforms, so they almost become regulators. While you're making this point, I really want to ask you, do you see any remedies against this? Can this be remedied? What is your opinion on this, UDC? Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. So in this output document,
we analyzed different range of policy options that are available to address the basically delegation of powers from governments to platforms, and how to ensure the maintenance of human rights in this framework. So I just want to make the point that we don't suggest that regulation should apply, regardless of the context. We should make sure that there is a market failure before there is actual regulation. But there are other modes of intervention which can be up to address the market failures, taking into consideration the context. So one of the possibilities is to adopt co-regulation. So you have some principles laid out by the government according to which platforms should operate within boundaries. Another possibility is to impose a secondary liability for uses that are made of the platforms. So this is also not, strictly speaking, regulation like command and control regulation, but is another way of intervening. And then there is a possibility of self-regulation. But in the case of self-regulation, the state should not simply absolve its responsibilities by delegating it to the market. It should maintain an adequate supervision over this process. And it should, in particular, ensure that there are concrete mechanisms for remedy, because this is a joint duty that businesses and governments have according to the Ruggie principles on business and human rights. And I have a couple of suggestions with regard to concrete mechanisms that are being discussed by the Dynamic Coalition. So the first one is a trust framework that allows consumers to be empowered by not having to read all the terms and conditions, but enabling the rise of third parties that, much like in food and pharmaceuticals, will determine which kind of information is unfair to provide to consumers in terms of service. And the second mechanism, which is increasingly being discussed, is the right to explanation for any automated decision-making that significantly impacts individuals. This is in the European Data Protection Framework, and I think platforms should provide an API that allows users to engage into requests for explanation so that we have a personalized transparency, much like we have a personalized service.
Thank you very much. It's incredible how much one can explain in 3 minutes. Thank you, Nicola. And I found another interesting point on the digital platforms in the paper of the DC on gender and internet governance. Bishaha, I very much liked in the paper of this dynamic coalition the notion of consent for women, this two-tier notion, consent for production of anything and consent for distribution of anything. And you also say in the paper, your coalition says in the paper, that the law will probably not solve this problem. And there is a need for digital platforms to build in these ethical norms into their operations. I'm wondering if your dynamic coalition has already some thoughts about how make digital platform doing this. Are you going to cooperate with any digital platforms on promoting this? So what kind of actions are you taking in this regard? Thank you.
Asking a very provocative question. I think for us, what we would really like to explore is, people are already talking about privacy by design, right? And consent is sort of related to privacy. So I think what might be interesting is to explore the possibility of actually thinking about consent by design. How do you actually get platforms to think about consent not as an add-on or not as a technicality which is not meaningful in the way that it is actually implemented, but how can we get platforms to really think about their users in a way in which consent gets embedded in the design and the architecture of the platform. Because quite honestly, I think what laws help us is with dealing with violations of consent after they have occurred. that cannot be, the solution cannot be that it will continue to be a violation and the law will address it. So I think what we need is to think about how do we prevent consent from being violated in the first place, and also how do we build in an ethics of consent? Is there a way, I mean, often the violation occurs on a platform of consent. Sorry, I meant to say the violation of consent occurs on a platform, but it's often users violating each other's consent by publishing things that are consensually produced but are being non-consensually distributed. So, you know, with all the wonderful imaginative sort of things that are happening in the world of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, etc., we would really love to talk to platforms about developers really using their sort of imagination and their skills and capacities to think of this as an interesting problem that needs a design solution.
Thank you very much, because I did think, like, from the entire paper, which raises many issues about women privacy, about women's security, I thought that was a very interesting point about consent, because I didn't consider it like this, like before. So thank you very much. And I'm going to move to the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. And Minda, I want to build upon what I asked last year, because I asked last year your dynamic coalition, what was your definition of success in advancing the charter, in promoting it. And now I see that your dynamic coalition came up with the educational resource guide. So I want to ask you, how are you going to marry this concept of charter as principles that have to be adopted and the educational resource guide? So how is it advancing your goals? Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's a very good question, actually, because as you know, the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition has been working on developing and promoting the Charter of Human Rights and Principles for the Internet over the past few years, so since 2011, when it was first launched. The Charter has these 21 articles that we're trying to promote over the years, and is obviously based on international laws and norms, human rights, international law and norms. And the first work of the coalition after the launching the charter was to translate it into different languages so that it could be accessible to a wider audience. And then campaigning at national and international level for the recognition as well of the charter, and to include the charter in policy making and laws that are dealing with internet governance and human rights online. So the resource guide comes as a natural next step. So basically what we are trying to do now is to unpack the 21 articles from the Charter and to look how each one of these articles call up specific issues that are relevant to specific regions, communities and countries. So the work contained in this Charter can actually then include suggestions, case scenarios that illustrate issues arising from these 21 articles of the Charter. And we aim to develop a document that is an open-ended document, so everyone can have feedback, input, and these hopefully will be very helpful to a wider audience, because it can be used not only in classrooms, but also for governments, to promote the Charter to lawmakers, policymakers, businesses, and even the technical community. So we hope that this is really the next step to put the Charter out there. And I think that there's a lot of interest in the Charter. So just to give you a very simple example, my only copy that I brought, annotated and everything. All the other ones already disappeared. I left mine upstairs and it was gone in minutes. So I cannot show it here today, but obviously there's a lot of people that come to us and ask more about the charter and would like to use it. We had a session just 2 days ago on the resource guide, and we had loads of inputs, great input from all around the world, from all the regions, from Latin America, from Southeast Asia. So I think that this is obviously the next step, and I think is going to open up the charter to a very a big audience from now on.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to move to another questions of rights. To DC on community connectivity. Luca, normally when I hear or read anything about creation of new rights, like right to be forgotten or some other rights, I'm very skeptical. But I saw in your paper a very interesting concept. You refer to the right to network self-determination, and I did find it interesting. So can you elaborate on this, please?
Tatiana, so actually, well, first of all, let me say that our annual report here is made up of 10 contributions by 18 different members of the coalitions that have cooperated together. At the end, we have also a collective document, a declaration on community connectivity, that we developed through a multi-stakeholder process over the past year with several consultations. In the various contributions, well, my contributions is actually based on the empirical observation of what community networks are. They are crowdsourced networks, and actually they demonstrate that there is already de facto a right to network self-determination. It could be the 22nd right of your charter, which is the right of every individual, of every community, to associate freely, define in a democratic fashion the management, development, implementation of network infrastructure as a common goods, so that everyone can freely access, share, and impart innovation and information. So it's a matter, if we want people to define and contribute to their digital development, this is essential. And actually, I'm not arguing this as a new concept that I want to put, to throw in the basket of the new concepts. I'm arguing this because, first of all, it already exists in practice. I analyze in my paper also the positive externalities of community networks. They not only provide access to the internet, they create new social bonds in the community, entirely new economic ecosystem with new services, new creativity, new application, empowering women because women get involved in the creation and the involvement in the establishment of the network, creating new jobs. Gifinet, which is the biggest community network, has created more than 100 direct jobs of people that maintain the network. And this is based on what already exists juridically at the international level. Both the first article of the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the first article of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the first article of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights recognize the right to self-determination as the right to pursue one's economic and social development. And this is a right of choice and the right of process. It means that people have their fundamental right to define how they want to evolve economically and socially, and states have the positive obligation to allow them to do so. This is precisely stated both in the Article 1 in the Indent 3 of the both covenants. So this is already something that exists juridically, and I think everyone should have the right to do so.
Thank you very much, Luca. And I'm moving from the DC on community connectivity to another dynamic coalition which mentioned community networks in the paper. Esmeralda from DC on public access to libraries is going to answer my question about this, because you made a point about marrying up community networks and public libraries. And you made some examples, I think it was Tunisia and Colombia, but it wasn't exactly on this issue. I'm going to ask you, how is UDC going to advance this marriage? How UDC is going to facilitate this marriage between community networks and libraries? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yes, our dynamic coalition on public access actually was the need for this coalition was realized in 2011 when one of our partner, IFOL, the Electronic Information for Libraries, shared an outcome of a survey where the majority of policy makers and politicians in developing countries had a different image about what libraries and librarians do on an everyday basis. And a lot of our work is, in fact, in both developed and developing country, but especially in the developing country, the idea of relying upon a network that is based in the community is absolutely fundamental for us. And the ways in which this can be achieved are actually were part of our discussion yesterday during our public access meeting, because we, when we were preparing for all the various meetings here, we were discussing again public access, but then we said, but public access has its merits, everybody knows it. So what is the way to move forward? How can we get together to sort of change whether the regulatory framework to allow this connectivity in places that might be remote or that might also be in developed countries? How can we do that? So there are two ways. The ways is like, one way is of course to try to push onto local, regional and state governments to understand the need and the importance of public access to achieve a series of goals, which were also stated in the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, but also at the community level. We have a strategic network that is about of 2 million and counting libraries worldwide. And these libraries are all so very different. They represent a community. Community can be in Southern Africa, in East Asia, and they have needs that are absolutely different one from the other. So the first way we would like to approach the needs of the community is to assess the needs and launch a survey assessment, a need survey assessment, and from there also assess what are the infrastructures and tools available to move forward and provide access to these communities.
Thank you very much. And another dynamic coalition who is doing a lot of work on connecting the unconnected. Christopher, I saw the very impressive long list of case studies from all around the world. How are you going to use them? What is your next step? I know that you're a very new coalition and you're still kind of in the thick of it, collecting information and analyzing it. So what's your next step?
So the next step is to continue to consolidate the information and to begin to analyze it. For those of you who don't know, our dynamic coalition is dedicated to a cause I think that everyone in this room shares. There are 7 billion people in the world. Only half of them are online, and adoption rates are slowing. And it's not for lack of innovative experiments and ways to connect people. There are hundreds of them. But no one is studying them in a systematic way. In particular, no one is collecting data about what works and what doesn't work. And even if there is data collected, it's done in a random way that is not consistent, that allows cross-project comparisons. And so our commitment is to really to try to lay the empirical foundation for decision makers, whether they're ministries or international finance communities, or what we're finding is even social impact investors on the private side are very interested in this idea, to try to pull this together and to analyze what models are working and what won't work. And what isn't working. So we are spanning both demand side and supply side interventions, because as anyone who knows this space, the idea if you build it, they will come has not been true. that digital literacy, and interestingly, maybe a blind spot for people in a program like this, many people in the world refuse to adopt because they don't see the relevance of the internet for their daily lives. And so these become major issues as well. And we're also looking for scalable and sustainable models. If we're going to get 3.5 billion more people on, grant programs and corporate social responsibility programs are very generous and an important part of it, but they're not going to lead to 3.5 billion more people. So we're co-conveners of Connecting and Enabling Next Billions here in the IGF. We're working with the best practice forums on gender. We're working with Equals. We're working with best practice forums on local content. We have disability access programs, and we're studying everything to get other communities in. And at this point, we have identified roughly 750 interventions spanning 150 countries, and they're all available on a database available through oneworldconnected.org. We are not just doing that. We've contacted all 750 and are conducting case studies with everyone who's willing to do so. We've developed 120 case studies spanning 50 countries at this point. And I confess, we migrated the server. Only 25 of them are online right now, but all of them will be online early in the new year of those 120. And so what we're finding out is that, in fact, what we need to do is that, in fact, there's not one solution. Urban areas which face with challenges on digital literacy or poverty are different from mountainous or island societies. You see different levels of support, different pre-existing infrastructure. And what we're going to have to do is develop template models of basic learnings to distill, once the full data set is in, to find out what works and what doesn't work. Last thing I'll say is the big step is to move outside communications ministries to health, education, and particularly finance. We're doing the gold standard of social science research, randomized controlled trials, to find out what's really working on development goals, because internet connectivity, as much as we love it, is not an end in itself. The way to mobilize entire governments is to tie into other broader themes.
Thank you very much. And another dynamic coalition on network neutrality. It's not like did case studies, but did the mapping exercise. And Luca, I know that mapping exercise, they're very extensive, and then they can be very rewarding if you use them in a right way. So you say that you're going to use it to facilitate the informed policy debate. Can you please elaborate, like, kind of how exactly? What is the use of this mapping?
Thank you very much. First of all, I forgot in the previous intervention, because I had too many things to say, that I would really want to publicly protest against the MAC decision to slash our time slot from 90 to 60 minutes, because if you work over the entire year and you have to present a work and collect feedback and debate it, 60 minutes is really not enough. And 90 minutes maybe is not even enough, so we should have maybe more, but at least equally to the other time slot, not less, because it makes it very difficult to have a concrete conversation and collect feedback. Having said that, I think that also my fellow DC coordinators share. I see heads in their positive way. I'm saying that the zero rating map that we have created is so far in a beta version. The aim is to collect data, reliable data on what zero rating plan exists in the world to inform public policy debate, but also is for every kind of stakeholder. It's for researchers, for entrepreneurs, for any kind of user. So we have mapped 80 countries. We have a beta version that has been released yesterday, is zerorating.info. You can freely find the beta version and contribute to it. The goal was indeed to also to stimulate further contributions, and I think there was a very positive reply. Yesterday I was speaking both with regulators, which is a very positive step, because usually they are maybe a little bit shy in contributing to this kind of crowdsourced exercise. Several regulators are willing to contribute. Several civil society members have contributed. So far we have the beta version with 80 countries. Now the exercise is still at a preliminary phase. As I was saying, is the beta version, but there is already some interesting conclusions that one can draw. First of all, that zero rating plans are much more common where there is no net neutrality legislation. Secondly, that there are some some services that are almost zero-rated everywhere, such as the applications of the Facebook group. This is primarily due to the fact that in the majority of countries we have examined, there is the notorious free basic program, where Facebook is always a must. Thirdly, it is very well. It is what last year I called in the previous section of the Dynamic Coalition the minitalization of the internet, which is turning the internet from a general purpose network to a predefined purpose network. The combination of limited data caps and a selection of services that spans from 3 to 15, 20 maybe, means that the user will only use will primarily use the 3 to 20 services that are sponsored, and the rest will not be used or only a limited use. So the user, rather than being a prosumer that can produce innovation, can share innovation freely, it's only a consumer of the sponsored services, which is a pity, and I don't think is the direction we want to move forward to if we want to let people build their digital future.
Thank you very much, Luca. And unless I forgot someone, I'm going to move to the last and the newest Dynamic Coalition, which is Jeremy Malcolm from DC on trade. And Jeremy, your paper is very impressive. I saw the full report, I saw the summary, and you say that you are developing recommendation for participation of diverse stakeholders in trade negotiations. And I know that there are different issues even within stakeholder groups right now. I want to ask you, because you are the newest coalition, right? What would be your, what I call, definition of success for the next year of work? How are you going to advance these recommendations which you make? Thank you.
Well, we had our inaugural meeting yesterday, and part of the meeting was to finalize our recommendations on transparency and inclusiveness of trade negotiations. And in a way, that was the easiest thing to do, because there are the fewest differences within our community, within any of the stakeholder groups on that. I think if you're participating at the IGF, you inherently realize the value of multi-stakeholder participation. So there's certainly a pretty easy consensus on that, but it becomes more difficult when you have to reach consensus on substantive issues, like, for example, should the promotion of the free flow of data in trade agreements be encouraged, or do we have concerns about this? And if so, what are those concerns? So I think over the next year, we will be trying to reach more consensus, or more understanding at least, on what should be the limits of the free flow of data online, and should any of those limits be negotiated in trade agreements. One of the other things that we want to do this year, and one of our definitions of success, will certainly be to extend the membership of the coalition to include more members of the trade community. We have plenty of members of the internet governance community, but I think our outreach to trade lobbyists and negotiators is very important. Thankfully, just since yesterday, we have had a new government member join, so I think already we're showing some progress on that count, but that will be one of our main metrics of success over the next year as well.
Thank you very much. And as we haven't exhausted your time, well, I think I might ask the question later, put myself in the queue for the general questions. And I think, yes, this is it. I think, is anyone from the Dynamic Coalition wants to add something? Because you had only 3 minutes. Yes, please.
Okay, I'm adding to something Olivier said from the Dynamic Coalition on core internet values, and want to respond particularly to your opening remark that we are adding a new value, freedom from harm. Freedom from harm has been extensively discussed, and its importance has been well understood by the participants of the coalition. But it is not being added as a value, for the reason that the values that are lying at the core of the internet are unalterable. They form the very foundation of the internet, and those are inherent values. And for example, if you talk about freedom as a value, that is never altered. Truth as a value, it's never altered. So the core internet values are all or the inherent values. So we will pay due attention to freedom from harm in our debates, but it's not being added as a value. Thank you.
Excuse me. So that your name isn't entered, this is Avridoria speaking, so that your name doesn't enter the record as a question mark, please remember to give your name when you start to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Because I think that we finished the intervention from Dynamic Coalitions, and I would really like to open the floor to whomever who wants to add something, ask something, grill these people sitting here, because that's what they are here for. Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the multidisciplinary or like cross-dynamic coalition sentiment as it's related to blockchain, because blockchain actually poses significant risks to many of the goals we talked about here, being censorship resistant, being difficult to govern and control, and that being actually one of the ways that it provides value is that it's difficult to interfere with. You know, we definitely need to chat about how blockchain will interact with your missions.
Thank you very much, Martin. You're the next.
Thank you very much. For me, what we've been doing here over the years is very much a complement to necessity, and that is to make sure that decision makers in their decision making don't make the mistakes that were not foreseen, so the unintended consequences. So in that way, we are working on developing a good understanding of good practice in all our areas over time. I think it's very important for us to also ensure that we develop it beyond the groups that we are in at the moment. I call for clear attention for getting out there with it, and by trying to find other platforms and powerful partners that can help develop the thoughts further, but also spread the thoughts. Because it's great if you have great papers on good practice. It's even better if they're used.
Thank you very much, Christopher. You are recognized, but can we just, because I think there was a question from there, right? Can we first accept the question, because I think they raised their hand before you. Thank you. Andrea. And then you're the next.
Thank you.
This is Andrea Sachs. I want to emphasize something that I think is extremely important regarding accessibility. Am I not close enough? Sorry, I wanted to emphasize something I think is extremely important that Shadi Abuzara mentioned about working together with the other coalitions. We have an impediment when we have the calls. We really need to find a way to finance captioning so everybody can participate in the calls, because I would be very happy to work out something with the organizers for that, because I know there's a financial impediment to this. But I can't join WebEx very well, and there are problems with that. But if we had captioning, there are chat boxes in there, and there are other ways of communicating. And Zoom is being discussed now, because our way of, this is a wonderful room. We've done it really well. Accessibility is important to every single dynamic coalition, and access to be able to work together is even more so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. You're the next.
Very much. There's one other answer I wanted to give to your initial question. Another way we're going to take the work to another stage is we've invited project teams to come here and actually tell their stories in the first person. We actually have 9 project teams who are actually building the internet. And I think many of what we do here at the IGF is at a very high level. And I think we benefit from that. If you came to the CEMD session on Monday, you heard from 4 of them. We have a session tomorrow at 10:40 in room 12 where we have 5 more teams to tell from all different continents of the world to tell the story about how the challenges they face and the things that they overcome. And I couldn't be prouder of them. And if you want to continue to get information about these stories, oneworldconnected.org, and that's with the number 1, not the word, has a blog. It has all the stories, and we're having a platform for all the great work that they're doing. We have a Twitter feed. We have a YouTube channel. We have a Facebook group where we're pushing out all the content as much as possible, because I think these are great stories and they need to be told. And I think that everyone in this room understands the importance of that more than anyone.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Thank you. Khalid Ibrahim from the Gulf Center for Human Rights. I have a question for the Dynamic Coalition. Do you have any initiative to reach out to some regions that I feel strongly that they are underrepresented in this coalition? For example, we have little information about your activities in the MENA region. So my question to the Dynamic Coalition and the other coalitions that they made some presentation just now, do you have any initiatives to reach for the MENA region or other regions? We just feel that we are not well connected to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any of the Dynamic Coalition wants to take these questions about your cooperation, collaboration, participation from the MENA region? Yes, please. Internet Rights and Principles Coalition is going to answer.
Hanan Boujami, co-chair of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. I think this is a perfect space for everybody from all around the world to come, to exchange stories and experiences. And I think we don't work at the regional level with regards to the dynamic coalitions. It's more of a global initiative, and sometimes we do customize activities to be specific to a region, like IRPC already did that with the MENA region, and I'm not sure if other dynamic coalitions are prepared to do the same, to be honest with you. This is not something, Alex, like all this work that you heard about here is like self-initiated, kind of, because people have interest in specific topics and they lead the agenda.
Thank you very much. So it's not like any of the dynamic coalitions. So any dynamic coalition perceives itself here as a place to gather people to contribute and not go out and do outreach in the regions. Am I right? So this was the essence of the answer. So yeah, please. So first Bishaka and then Christopher. Thank you. Microphone.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to that, while we don't see ourselves necessarily as sort of regional focused, one of the things we do try and do is get input from different regions. And the way we do that is sometimes because the issues we work on in our coalitions are often issues that we also work on outside of our coalitions the rest of the year. So at meetings that we may convene, for example, at the DC on Gender and Internet Governance, some of our positions are building from a document called The Feminist Principles of the Internet. And these principles have actually been evolved in consultation with civil society groups around the world through meetings that have been held in different regions. So in that sense, there would be participants from MENA as well as from other regions who are shaping the agenda. So it's not sort of a direct thing, but in an indirect way, I think there are very strong regional voices in this process.
Thank you very much, Christopher. You're the next.
Well, thank you. It is important for us, for our project, to reach out to all regions of the world, and we pride ourselves on it. Spanning 150 countries, by definition, we are in every region in the world. Specifically with respect to MENA, we actually have a number of case studies, the most important of which is Tawasul in Tunisia, which is an education-based case study in doing fantastic work. And we actually even spoke at an ITU event by invitation in Morocco to try to start to share with those communities some of the things that we're learning. This is very preliminary, about 6 months ago. It is something we're actually in the next phase are looking for venues to speak and to share the learnings after we've consolidated them, so we'd welcome the opportunity to engage.
Thank you very much. I see that Olivier wants to add something, but I also remember about MENA region, for example, Dynamic Coalition on Access to Public Libraries also had a case in Tunisia. And now, Olivier, John.
Thanks very much, Tatiana. You'll notice that most of the dynamic coalitions perform their own outreach in their own ways and their own networks. At the same time, there's also this outreach that is required at IGF level. And this very meeting is a meeting to outreach to all of you to take part The dynamic coalitions really welcome new participants. All of them welcome new participants. We're not just here to talk to each other. Actually, we have very regular calls. The different DC chairs have very regular calls. And one of the discussions we've had is how to actually have better outreach within the IGF, how to get more people involved, not only in the global IGF, but with regional IGFs and in the national IGFs. So it's really a case of trying to pull more people in and get more people to be involved in the dynamic coalitions. So we can't really give all the answers. I think part of it is that you have to give us some answers as to how we could do this better. It would be great to have some input from participants here in the room, and how we can actually get the dynamic coalitions work more upfront and get people to have easier access to it, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to add something on this question about MENA?
Yeah, just briefly to point out that the ECPAT International, which is the convener of the Dynamic Coalition on Child Internet Safety, is itself a global NGO, and I think we have now around 80 chapters on all 5 continents, including several in the MENA region, who've contributed in one way or another to ECPAT International's work and input into the Dynamic Coalition. So whilst the coalition itself doesn't focus in a regional way, it is absolutely the case that contributions from different regions, including MENA, have been reflected in the work that we've been presenting both in the Declaration of Rome and here today.
So before I move to next question from Jutta, I think there was another intervention on MENA question, so we wrap it up. Yes, Marilyn, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Marianne Franklin, co-chair of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. To follow up from my co-chair colleague, Hanan Boujemi, in terms of outreach and effect, the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition and the Charter has been very present and involved in the European dialogue on internet governance, which is held around the larger Europe. So that in itself is a place where we take the work. The Charter has been included in political processes in Brazil, New Zealand, and even Italy. So whilst we are all limited in terms of human resources and human power, we are all working very, very hard to take the work out and bring the work in. So in that sense, it's a joint effort. But there's a lot going on. We just need to make clear what is already being done and then build on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn. And Jutta, you had a question, right? So let's start with another question. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up Jutta Kroll speaking from the Dynamic Coalition on Child Online Safety. I wanted to pick up a point that Bishaka made in her presentation about the concept of consent by design. And I think that is a very important concept that should be spread to more people. I've been to so many sessions where we were talking, for example, about violent content, about Out of My Hands a session, about sextortion. We are talking about consent with regard to the GDPR, which becomes very important now in the next year in Europe. So the concept of consent by design could be very useful for a lot of work that we are doing, and I really appreciate the efforts you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to address this comment?
I want to thank you, Tatiana, because till you asked that question, I hadn't actually thought of consent by design. But then I think part of the issue is also because we do talk about privacy by design, right? And it is getting widespread acceptance. So I think we would love to actually collaborate and see how we could move things like this forward. Yeah.
Are there any further questions right now? I don't see any hands, but I would like to take it further with Nicolo from Platform Responsibility Dynamic Coalition. What would be your opinion about platforms' participation in all these processes, building in ethical issues? Because apparently there should be a balance, on how much the platform can do and cannot do. Can you maybe share your thoughts? I know it sounds like a very kind of rather question which has no answer for now, but how to keep this balance between what is needed ethically and what platform can do without stepping into private regulation with no borders?
Okay, that's a hard question, but I think the notion that was put forward here of consent by design is an interesting one. And also, I like the reference to the responsibility not only of platforms, but users themselves, because many of the issues are not so much about the role of the platforms in policing the responsibility, the relationship between users, but it's also about the user, about the actual impact that they can have with their actions. So I think a key role there is not only allowing users to participate in the governance of the platforms through transparency mechanisms, but also informing users about the potential harm that their actions can cause. And another issue which I think is important is the role of anonymity on these platforms. This is a key question because many of the hateful speech that you see on these platforms is generated by individuals who feel that they will not be caught. So should platforms preserve a full anonymity for users? That's one of the key questions that we have to grapple with in the years to come. And I don't have an answer, unfortunately, to that.
Thank you very much. John, you wanted to add something?
No, it was a question. I was treating myself as a member of the public, if I may.
This is very good. I welcome this, so please do ask the question.
Yeah, it was to the Dynamic Coalition on Trade. One of the things that we, as children's organisations, have been very concerned about is in the NAPFA discussions that are taking place between the USA, Canada and Mexico, which could be a precursor for similar trade negotiations that might take place in the future. But at the moment, it's limited solely to Canada and Mexico. In the first drafts of the documents that the State Department have presented to the Canadian and Mexican government, there is a proposal to replicate Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, a clause which is thoroughly discredited because of the way that it's protected back page, for example, and in fact is on the verge of being amended by the US Senate, finally in recognition of its inadequacies. So I wondered if that was the kind of issue that your coalition was interested in, because we're very concerned, first of all, that it doesn't appear in the final text of the trade agreement between America, Canada and Mexico, and that it certainly doesn't appear, by the way, speaking as post-Brexit Britain, I'm guessing that when we try to get a trade deal with the United States ourselves, we certainly wouldn't want anything like that to reappear in it. Is that the kind of thing that you're looking at or could look at? In which case, if it is, I'm your friend.
Really will be my friend after you hear what I have to say about it. Okay, cool. So Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, for those who don't know what it is, it's a provision of US law which is basically a safe harbor for internet platforms. It means that they are not liable for the speech of their users. In other words, if a user uploads content to a platform that might be defamatory, or it might be a sex advertisement that might be exposing the... It might be illegal for the user to do that, but it isn't illegal for the platform to host it, because the platform is not treated as a publisher of that content. They're treated as an intermediary. So what Section 230 does is provides a safe harbor, as I say, for platforms for most types of content, with the exception of a few things like federal criminal law is exempted from Section 230 already. And copyright law is not treated under Section 230. It's treated under a separate law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So with that explanation out of the way, the issue is whether this provision of US law should become a regional standard in the NAFTA agreement. And Mexico and Canada at the moment, and this is the good news for you at least, I think, are opposing that because their law doesn't work in quite the same way. They do have conditional, platforms are not automatically liable for their users' content, but neither are they automatically given protection from liability. Rather, the courts in Mexico and Canada will take that on a case-by-case basis. They will look at, for example, has the platform encouraged or become aware of and somehow assumed responsibility for a user's speech on the platform. So I think, yes, in answer to your question, this is an issue that the Dynamic Coalition could take up, but whether we would come down on one side or the other, I'm not sure. I mean, it is an issue probably where it would be difficult to reach a consensus. And in those cases, at the moment, we've started by avoiding such contentious issues and focused on the ones that are more easy, like, as I said, transparency and participation. So I'm not sure. I think there is merit in at least discussing it and exploring the areas of possible consensus or possible disagreement. But I very much doubt that as a coalition we would come down unanimously against the idea of the kind of safe harbor that we find in Section 230. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And I see that Nicolo has either a question or comment.
Up from that, since we are talking about platforms, I cannot refrain from just mentioning that I think here what we're talking about, Section 230, is one of the hot issues of discussion in the United States at the moment, because for about 20 years this has served, according to the common understanding of this safe harbor, it has generated a lot of innovation. It has allowed US companies to grow, and many would say that the reason why all these platforms are based in the US is that they had this protection where they were not considered publishers. And there is also a rule that says the Good Samaritan rule. So whenever you intervene to remove content that you consider inappropriate for your platform, you should not be responsible for that. So now that we recognize that these platforms have gathered an immense amount of power, there is a discussion about reforming this law in the United States. And this is precisely also the type of discussion that we are having in the European Union on putting more responsibility on platforms to detect and remove potentially illegal content. So here, the point that I wanted to make, following up Jeremy's, is that a lot of this is being injected into trade agreements and then requiring states to impose these safe harbors into their laws, or enhance the responsibility of platforms directly implemented into national laws without the participation of individuals. So this is why I think our dynamic coalition is